All right, in this video, we're going to look at completing the square. In my previous video, I talked about completing the square when the coefficient of a was equal to 1. In this video, we're going to look at it when the coefficient of a is not equal to 1. So it makes it a little bit more tedious, but it doesn't make it any more difficult. It's going to give you fractions at times. It's going to give you some very strange numbers that we're working with. But if aside from that, it's not going to make the problem any more difficult. So I'm going to give you my steps that I do. I find this to be the easiest way to kind of work through some of these problems. The first thing that I do is I move the constant. So that's going to be my first step, whether the coefficient of a is equal to 1 or not. I'm going to move the constant away from my variables. Then I am going to factor the a coefficient from a and b. So bear in mind, I will have moved that constant term over, and then I am factoring a from a and b. Once I've done that, I'm going to divide both sides by that factor, getting rid of that factor. So that's not too bad. Once I've done that, everything is the same as it was before. I'm going to take half of b, 1/2 of b. I'm going to square it. And then I'm going to add it to both sides. Once I've done that, I'm going to complete the square, the same that we did when the coefficient was equal to 1. So with all of these steps in mind, let's go ahead and look at our two examples. So in my first example, I have solved for x by completing the square of 2x squared plus 8x minus 1. Well, again, I'm going to move those constants away from my variables. That's going to give me 2x squared plus 8x equals 1. Then I am going to factor the a term from a and b. So I'm going to pull out that 2. That gives me x squared plus 4x equals 1. And then I'm going to divide both sides by 2. I'm going to divide everything by that factor. So that's going to give me x squared plus 4x equals 1/2. Because I'm going to divide everything by 2, that gives me 1/2. At this step, now it's just like it was in my previous video. I'm going to take half of b, which I know is 2. I'm going to square it, and that gives me 4. I'm then going to add 4 to both sides. So that gives me x squared plus 4x plus 4 equals, and I'm going to write this as 4.5. I just don't necessarily like dealing with fractions all the time, but in this particular stance, we'll make it 4.5. And now I have my quadratic. So what I can do here is I can write this as x, since all of my signs are addition, it's going to be plus, and then how do we get the term that goes right here? Well, remember, it's whatever half of b was. So half of b originally was 2. So I can write this as x plus 2 squared equals 4.5. At this point, I'm going to take the square root of both sides because I want to solve for x. That's going to give me x plus 2 equals square root of 4.5. And if I go ahead and clean that up by taking the square root of 4.5, I get 2.12, or, yeah, we'll just leave it as x plus 2 equals 2.12. I'm going to subtract 2 from both sides. Actually, back up. I apologize. That gives me x plus 2 equals plus or minus 2.12. So now when I am solving for these, I'm give myself a little bit more room here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have x plus 2 equals 2.12, x plus 2 equals negative 2.12. I'm going to subtract 2 from both sides. That gives me x equals 0.12, and this gives me x equals, I'm going to subtract 2, negative 4.12. And that's my completing the square and solving for x when the coefficient of a is not equal to 1. Very easy. So again, let's do another step. Let's do another example here. And for this particular problem, what I'm going to do is the same thing. I'm going to add 5 to both sides. That's going to give me 3p squared minus 2p equals 5. I'm going to factor out 3. Now, if you notice, this is going to give me fractions. And a lot of people will get very upset or very confused here. They're going to be like, I don't know if I'm doing it right. It's okay. It's okay. So what I want to do is I want to factor out that 3. That gives me p squared minus 2/3 p equals 5. And then I'm going to divide everything by 3. So that gives me p squared minus 2/3 p equals 5/3. At this point, I want to take half of my b value. So 2/3, I'm taking half of that, is going to give me 2/6 or 1/3. And I want to square my b value, that half, and that's going to give me 1/9. Okay, so again, this is no different than what I've done in the past. I took half of that b value, that gave me 1/3, and then I took 1/3 and I simply squared it. And that gave me 1/9. So now I'm going to add 1/9 back to both sides. So I get p squared minus 2/3 p plus 1/9 equals, well, I need a common denominator here. Multiply the top and bottom by 3. And that gives me 15/9 plus 1/9. That gives me 16/9. So cleaning up my fractions some more. P squared minus 2/3 p plus 1/9 equals 16/9. Now we can clean up our problem a little bit more. And I can write this as my squared binomial. So I have p minus, remember, it's whatever 1/2 of that b value was, squared equals 16/9. At this point, solve for p. I'm going to take the square root of both sides. That gives me p minus 1/3 equals plus or minus. Well, if we take the square root of this, we wind up with 4/3. So again, that gives me p minus 1/3 equals 4/3. And then p minus 1/3 equals negative 4/3. Add 1/3 to both sides. That gives me p equals 5/3. And then I'm going to add 1/3 to both sides, and that gives me p equals negative 3/3 or negative 1. And that's it. So again, when it's not a coefficient of 1, when that a is not a coefficient of 1, we can get some crazy fractions and whatnot, but it doesn't make our problem any harder. The more you practice with these, the better they'll get. I hope it made sense. Please be sure to check out my other video for completing the square without a coefficient other than 1. But thanks for checking out the video. We'll see you next time.